I'm going to talk today, I want you to think about this question that I've got up here about being a good parent means keeping your child happy, and I just want you to think about that and whether that's true or false. And I'm going to say that that's false, but you might think on first glance that, you know, am I mad to say that? Don't we want to have happy children? And of course we do as an ultimate goal, but the problem is that trying to keep your child happy is a goal that kind of leads to problems for the child and the parent. And to illustrate that, I just want to start with a few overheard comments from the last week that I've overheard parents say to children, and these are from cafes. And I know it's terrible, you don't want to be sitting near me in a cafe because I might be writing things down. But I do hear nice things as well. But these are sort of comments I heard in the last week. Stop whinging. Don't be in a mood, otherwise you're going to make everyone else moody. You're not cold, it's really warm in here. And don't be sad, cheer up. And the thing is about these, they're things on the whole, they're probably coming from a good place. They're probably coming from a place of, I want my child to be happy. But the problem is that they're invalidating. So basically, invalidation is where you're sort of denying somebody's feeling or saying, you know, don't have that feeling. And the problem with that, there's two problems with that. One is that it's not good for your mental health, which I'll come on to, but also negative emotions have benefits. You know, they've evolved for a reason. So anger, sadness and fear, these are things that have evolved that there's a reason to them, and they might help us detect threat and danger, and help us defend ourselves, and so on. So actually, if you were just trying to shut off negative emotions all the time, you're potentially losing the benefits that those emotions have. So if you're not doing that, if you're not invalidating, what are you doing? So emotional validation is quite simple to describe, really. You acknowledge somebody's feelings. So it's as simple as, in this case with this photo, oh dear, you look sad. And that's validation. Now, although it's easy to describe, I think it's hard to remember to do. So often people don't do this. What they do is they try to problem solve an emotion. They try to sort of find out, you know, what can I do to make you happy? So that's validation. And why does that matter? Well, I've got a couple of quotes here from Haim Ginott, who is the sort of parenting expert from the 1960s, influenced by Carl Rogers. And he has a couple of quotes. He pioneered this kind of technique of emotional validation. And one of them is sanity depends on trusting one's inner reality. So the idea is that if somebody is denying your inner reality, I mean that quote of someone saying you're not cold, it's alienating for you. You're alienated from your feelings. It's harder for you to know how to deal with them. And there could be mental health issues with that. And he has this other lovely phrase of how to drive your child sane. And he says a lot of typical parenting talk drives children insane. And he means things like blaming, shaming, ridiculing, moralizing, controlling. So to put it into more sort of formal terms about what emotional validation gives you, there's two things I've got here: emotional awareness and emotional regulation. So emotional awareness is just being aware, being able to reflect on your emotions and label them and talk about them. And unfortunately, emotions don't come ready labelled, so we need to learn how to do that. And that also helps with emotion regulation, which is being able to deal with your emotions, understand the kind of helpful aspects of emotions, but not letting emotions rule your life. So just to give a sort of illustration of both of these, you know, if you think of a sort of panic attack or something like that, one of the problems with a panic attack is often people aren't aware of it as anxiety, and they just think that they're having a heart attack or that there's some other sort of impending doom. So there's a lack of emotional awareness there. And actually the first stage often in treating a panic attack is to get someone to realise that it's anxiety. And when you know it's anxiety, that's actually, there's more you can do with that than you can do with having a heart attack. So you're able to regulate your emotion better. And there's quite good research evidence that some of the effective emotion techniques, including emotion regulation techniques, including talking about your emotions, accepting emotions, feel the fear and do it anyway, reappraising a situation, trying to think about things differently. These are all things that really require you to be aware of your emotions. You can't really talk about them if you're not aware of them. You can't really accept them if you're not aware of them. So the idea really here is that emotional validation helps people to become aware of their emotions, which is a thing that's quite hard to do and is not something that you're born knowing how to do. And that then helps with emotion regulation. And one reason why this is an important thing, I think, is that quite a lot of people nowadays are arguing that a lot of mental health problems have at their root emotion dysregulation, so difficulties in regulating emotion. And some people think, every mental health problem, but certainly these ones that I've put up here are all things that could stem from problems with emotion regulation. So I mentioned panic attacks already, but things like self-harm, where people just don't know what to do with a really strong emotion and might find that they get relief from self-harm, but it's not really a very good regulation technique. And in terms of children, there's also research that shows that children who have better emotional awareness and better emotion regulation have fewer symptoms of depression, anxiety and aggression. So there's research showing that it's important to be able to regulate your emotions. But what I want to do now is to sort of give you an illustration of emotional validation in action to try to explain kind of how it works. And I thought that I'm going to use this story from John Gottman, which is from his book, The Heart of Parenting. And it's a really nice illustration, so I'm going to read it for you. And listen out for the invalidation and the validation. So, I remember the day I first discovered how emotional validation might work with my own daughter, Mariah. She was 2 at the time, and we were on a cross-country flight home after visiting with relatives. Bored, tired and cranky, Mariah asked me for Zebra, her favourite stuffed animal and comfort object. Unfortunately, we had absent-mindedly packed the well-worn toy in a suitcase that was checked at the baggage counter. "I'm sorry, honey, we can't get Zebra right now. He's in the big suitcase in another part of the aeroplane," I explained. "I want Zebra," she whined pitifully. "I want Zebra! I want Zebra!" she moaned again. Then she started to cry, twisting in her safety seat. "I know you want Zebra," I said, feeling my blood pressure rise, "but he's not here and I can't do anything about it. Look, why don't we read about Ernie?" I said, fumbling for one of her favourite picture books. "Not Ernie," she wailed, angry now. "I want Zebra. I want him now." By now I was getting do-something looks from the passengers. I looked at Mariah's face, red with anger, and imagined how frustrated she must feel. Why was I withholding her favourite toy from her? Didn't I understand how much she wanted it? I felt bad. Then it dawned on me, I couldn't get Zebra, but I could offer her the next best thing, a father's comfort. "You wish you had Zebra now," I said to her. "Yeah," she said sadly. "And you're angry because we can't get him for you?" "Yeah." "You wish you could have Zebra right now," I repeated, as she stared at me, looking rather curious, almost surprised. "Yeah," she muttered, "I want him now." "You're tired now, and smelling Zebra and cuddling with him would feel really good. I wish we had Zebra here so you could hold him. Even better, I wish we could get out of these seats and find a big soft bed full of all your animals and pillows where we could just lie down." "Yeah," she agreed. "We can't get Zebra because he's in another part of the aeroplane," I said. "That makes you feel frustrated." "Yeah," she said with a sigh. "I'm so sorry," I said, watching the tension leave her face. She rested her head against the back of her safety seat. She continued to complain softly a few more times, but was growing calmer. Within a few minutes, she was asleep. Although Mariah was just 2 years old, she clearly knew what she wanted, her zebra. Once she began to realise that getting it wasn't possible, she wasn't interested in my excuses, my arguments, or my diversions. My validation, however, was another matter. So what I like about that story is that you see him doing sort of invalidating responses, which he's trying to sort of rationalise, he's trying to sort of say, look, just listen, we can't get zebra. He tries distraction. He says, oh, look at the nice Ernie book that you like, which is also an invalidating response. Those things don't work, and then he just gives her his validation. He gives her zebra in wishes. He says, you wish you could have zebra now. And it illustrates nicely kind of what emotional validation is about. And actually, one thing that's interesting about it is that in some ways it's easier to do than problem solving, because it's easier to actually do the validation than to somehow try and get zebra. In fact, you can't get him. So although people often struggle with trying to solve their children's problems, actually sometimes a simpler method is more effective. So I want to say a bit more about how you do emotional validation. So you acknowledge feelings, and you saw that in the story where he said you're feeling sad and you're feeling frustrated. And you can do it verbally and non-verbally, and I want to say a little bit in a moment about non-verbal examples of this. And you use comfort signals, so you might be saying, oh dear, poor you. I think just listening to somebody is comforting. There's a blues song called Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, and there's a line in it, nobody knows my sorrow. And there's the idea that just having someone listen, someone knowing your troubles in itself is quite comforting. So even just the listening aspect of validation is comforting. So I just want to explain a little bit about sort of non-verbal aspects, because I think they illustrate some quite nice features of how parents can relate to their child's emotions. So imagine this is my child, and he's very sad and he's upset, and I could obviously be ignoring him. I mean, maybe I'm looking at my phone, or maybe I've just got a neutral face, and you can kind of see that that's invalidating in that I'm not clocking it, I'm not attending to his emotion. So there's that. There's more extreme versions of invalidation where it's very incongruent. My child is sad and I'm angry, and I might be saying, stop it, and you hear people say this. Sometimes people have got screaming children or sad crying children, and the parent is angry. So that's incongruent, and you can see how that's invalidating. And it doesn't in any way help the child understand their own emotion, because you are actually giving a completely incongruent emotion. So you might think, well, that's not very nice, being angry, so maybe I should just be happy, which is like the kind of cheer up. But again, you can see it's incongruent, because it's not actually following how the child is feeling. And maybe the child, he's not ready to cheer up. It's all very well me being happy, but he's not happy. And that happens in the story where Gottman says, why don't we look at the Ernie book that you like? So you might then think, right, so if you want to be congruent, the correct response is a mirroring response. So psychologists, you often hear them talk about mirroring. But actually mirroring isn't any good either, because I tried to mirror this face as best as I could, and that's what I came up with. I tried to mirror that. And the problem with mirroring is that the mirroring also doesn't refer properly to the child's emotion, because it seems like I'm now sad. So the problem you've got is a kind of what's called emotional contagion, and you might get feedback where he's sad, I'm sad, we're making each other even sadder. And there's a technical term for this in psychology from Donald Winnicott, which is uncontaining. So an uncontaining response is where the parent doesn't really show the child that the parent is okay with them being sad or frightened, and that although they recognise it, they're not having the emotion. So what do you do then if you don't do these things? What's the validating response? Now, there is a kind of mirroring you can do that is a good kind of mirroring, which is called marked mirroring. This was named by Gergely Watson, the psychologist. And this is a kind of exaggerated sad face. And you do see people do this. It's a kind of, oh dear, I'm looking a bit sad. And the point about this kind of mirroring is that it is much clearer that the face is referring to the child. And children can pick up on this, that the idea is that reflection is a reference to your emotional state, so that they're able to gain awareness of their state. Another example of this in a different modality that people do quite a lot is if you see people pushing a child on a swing, and they might say, wee, in time with the swing, and that's called affect attunement, which is a similar idea as this, which is it's pretty clear that my vocal utterance is referring to the child's feeling state. So it's not me that's feeling this joyful feeling. I'm referring to their emotion, and so that would be an example of I'm doing something that shows that I'm referring to the feeling state. And this kind of exact mirroring seems to be about me. So there's no help with emotional awareness. Okay. I now want to move on to talk a little bit about research. How often do parents validate? And I was saying, this example of parents pushing a child on a swing is a good example where there is this kind of validation of joy. But I also said comments I overhear in the cafe where parents are saying, cheer up, don't be sad, and things like that. Now, in some research that we did here, that I did with Anglia Lindberg, we had a game where parents and children played snakes and ladders, and the child would have emotions. They'd sometimes go down a snake or up a ladder. They were about age 5 years old, roughly, and we were looking at how often the mothers validated or invalidated the emotions. And actually, it was quite surprising that validation was about 25% of negative emotions were validated, but about 75% were invalidated, which is mainly distraction, ignoring, not attending to the child's emotion or trying to make them cheer up, for example. So actually, invalidation was more common than validation of negative emotions. And another thing we looked at is, does validation link with a child's emotional awareness? So child's emotional awareness was scored in terms of actually asking the child how they felt at key points in the game, like when they lost a game, when they went down a snake, and matching that up with their facial expressions to sort of get a measure of how accurate they seemed to be. So all of this is observational data, which I quite like. It's not just questionnaires. And you're matching that up with mother's validation. And with lower validation, there was lower child's emotional awareness, and with higher validation, there was higher child's emotional awareness. Now, obviously, this is a correlation, and you can't necessarily infer a cause. But we can at least rule out, I think, that intelligence per se is not a factor. We did look at child's verbal IQ, did not correlate with their emotional awareness, and the mother's educational level didn't correlate with it either. So it's not simply that cleverer children and cleverer mother, cleverer children are better at emotional awareness and cleverer mothers are better at validation. That certainly wasn't a factor, where there could, of course, be other factors in there. But validation was quite strongly linked to how aware the child was of their emotions. So I think that there's evidence that validation might be a really useful technique to sort of increase emotional awareness. Now at this point, I just always like to talk about this issue, because people say to me, well, what about really difficult behaviour? And do you validate that? What about all the really problem things? So tantrums, aggression, emotional manipulation. So tantrums, your child really losing it in the restaurant. Aggression, your child is hitting their brother or hitting you. You know, we've all been there with a toddler kind of attacking you. Emotional manipulation. What about, oh, please, if you don't buy me that thing, I'm going to be so sad. You know, are we validating that? Well, the answer to that is that you are indeed validating the feelings, but you don't validate the behaviour. That's what you're validating. So the idea is that all feelings are acceptable, but that doesn't mean all behaviours are acceptable. So I have a phrase here. I can see you're really cross. Joe took your ball. Remember the rule, no hitting, use your words. So you can always validate the feeling. I can see you're really angry. Remember, no hitting, you know, and you're describing the rule, but you're still validating the emotion. I mean, young children find this hard because to remember a rule and inhibit an emotion is a difficult thing to do for young children, so you have to cut them some slack. But the principle is that you're validating feelings and you can still have rules about behaviour. And also, as a parent, you can have your own feelings as well. So on this scheme, you know, everyone's allowed to talk about their feelings, and you can talk about your feelings as a parent, so long as you're not blaming your child, you're not sort of saying, you made me angry. You can still say, I'm angry now. And if you keep to I statements, so I always try and remember it with this phrase, which I think does come from Haim Ginott, I need a rest, not you are a pest. So you can kind of say, you know, I'm tired, I'm frustrated, and that's part of the sort of emotional dialogue between you and your child. And try to kind of summarise the sort of thing you might say where you're doing this, so maybe a tantrum situation at home, and you might have something like this where there's validation at the start. You're really frustrated and angry because you wanted to go out. I can see you're suffering. I wish I could take you now, but I can't. So all of that is validation. There isn't a but. You don't need a but. You can say, with all this screaming, it's too noisy in here for me. I feel frustrated too. I need a bit of daddy time now. I always used to like that phrase, daddy time. So I'm going to go into the other room for a bit. I'll come back in a while and we can talk. So it's kind of, there's no blaming that. There's no kind of, you're giving me a headache. But I'm still kind of saying, you know, I'm tired. I'm frustrated. I need some quiet. So if you keep it as I statements, you can, you know, keep some boundaries with your child without having to sort of demean them in some way. So that's the idea about that. Okay, so I'm coming to the end now. I'm going back to that original question. Being a good parent means keeping your child happy. And I said, well, it's not that. So what do I think it is? And obviously, I don't know if I know the answer. I mean, I'm just a seeker of, I'm on a journey of trying to kind of seek the answers. But according to the scheme I've been presenting, what being a good parent means is that you're giving your child love and acceptance, so validation is about acceptance, and that what you're getting from that is good emotion regulation skills, autonomy skills, which I mean the child is independent or gradually learns to be independent, relationship skills because you're modelling a relationship. While you're doing it, you're modelling a kind of I'm okay, you're okay sort of relationship. You know, you're allowed to have your feelings, I'm allowed to have my feelings. And relationship skills are also really important ultimately for long-term well-being, because a lot of research shows that, you know, social support is one of the biggest factors in well-being, and having better relationship skills means that you access more social support. So I think there's nothing mentioned there about trying to keep your child happy. You know, you're giving them the acceptance, and that is going to help with their well-being. So To end, I've got a few quotes that illustrate these things. So the first quote is about acceptance. And it says, your kids require you most of all to love them for who they are, not trying to spend your whole time trying to correct them. And that's from Bill Ayres, who's an educational theorist. And I think that also illustrates that I think it's harder to try and correct your children. So actually loving them for who they are, it's less effort on one level. But that's the acceptance. And the autonomy, this is a quote that when I first read it, it made me feel a bit sad because I've got children who are just leaving home. But then I thought about it a bit more and then it made me really joyful because it says it's the one job where the better you are, the more surely you won't be needed in the long run. And the idea is that, you know, you're giving your child autonomy, you're launching them out into the world, and actually when you give them these skills, they don't need you anymore. I mean, you're always there in the background, you're always there as a shoulder to cry on, but the better you are at parenting, the more, the less they're going to need you. And finally, the same idea really in a sort of slightly more poetic way, there's this quite nice poem about children from Khalil Gibran, and I've got some excerpts from it here. And he says about parenting and children, you may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. Thank you. There.